a story about A. Joe the Notary, why more American families are moving back in together, and why it makes sense. Let me ask you something. Does it feel like no matter how hard you work, no matter how careful you try to be with money, it just keeps getting harder to keep up? You are not imagining it. You are not bad with money, and you are absolutely not alone. The cost of living in America has reached a point where millions of families are being forced to make a decision that previous generations never had to consider: moving back in together. And today, I want to talk about why that's happening, why it might actually be one of the smartest moves a family can make, and how to do it in a way that works for everyone. Section 1. The reality. The numbers don't lie. Let's just be honest about where we are right now. The average cost of a single-family home in the United States has more than doubled in the last 10 years. In many cities, Denver, Austin, Phoenix, Seattle, a starter home now costs $500,000 or more. Rent isn't much better. The average American renter is now spending 30 to 50% of their monthly income just on housing alone. Financial experts have always said to keep housing costs under 30%. For millions of families, that ship has sailed. And it isn't just housing. Groceries are up, utilities are up, car insurance is up. Childcare, if you have young kids, can cost as much as a second mortgage. And don't get me started on health care. Graphic. Average costs graphic. Housing, groceries, childcare, health care. Meanwhile, wages have not kept pace. A salary that felt comfortable 5 years ago feels stretched thin today. Something has to give. And for more and more American families, what's giving is the idea that every generation has to live completely separately. Section 2. The rise of the multi-generational home. Here's something that might surprise you. Multi-generational living, where grandparents, parents, and adult children share a home or live very close together, is actually the fastest-growing household arrangement in America. According to Pew Research, more than 60 million Americans now live in a multi-generational household. That number has nearly doubled since the 1970s. And it is not slowing down. For a long time, there was a kind of cultural stigma around it. Moving back home meant you failed. Having your parents move in meant something had gone wrong. But that thinking is changing. Fast. Because families are doing the math. And the math is telling them that living together isn't a step backward. It's a strategy. Section 3. Why it actually makes sense. Let's talk about what families are actually gaining when they choose multi-generational living. First, the obvious one. Shared housing costs. When 2 or 3 generations share a home, the mortgage or rent, the utilities, the internet, the lawn care, all of it gets divided. A family that might be struggling to afford a $2,500 a month mortgage on one income can breathe a whole lot easier when that cost is shared. Some families are saving $1,500 to $3,000 a month by combining households. That is real, life-changing money. Second, built-in childcare. For young families with children, this alone can justify the arrangement entirely. The average cost of full-time daycare in the United States ranges from $10,000 to $30,000 per year, depending on where you live. When grandparents are in the home, or just nearby, that cost can drop to nearly zero. And the children get to grow up knowing their grandparents in a deep, everyday way that is genuinely priceless. Third, caring for aging parents becomes manageable. Assisted living facilities can cost $4,000 to $8,000 per month. Memory care can run even higher. For many middle-class families, that cost is simply impossible. When aging parents live with their adult children, they get care, connection, and dignity, and families avoid one of the largest financial burdens a family can face. And fourth, the emotional piece. Life is hard right now. Loneliness is at epidemic levels in this country, especially among the elderly and young adults. Multi-generational living combats that directly. Children have role models, grandparents have purpose, parents have support. There is something deeply human about generations living and leaning on each other that we lost somewhere along the way, and a lot of families are finding their way back to it. Section 4, Making It Work. Honest tips now. I want to be real with you. Living together across generations is not without its challenges. Different schedules, different parenting styles, privacy, boundaries. These are real things that have to be navigated. So, here are a few things that make it work. Have honest conversations before anyone moves in. Talk about finances, chores, expectations, quiet hours, and personal space. Write it down if you need to. Treat it like a roommate agreement, because in a real way, that's what it is. Create private spaces where possible. A basement apartment, a converted garage, a mother-in-law suite. Having defined personal space for each generation goes a long way toward keeping the peace. Revisit the arrangement regularly. Life changes. Check in every few months and make sure the arrangement is still working for everyone. Give people a safe way to raise concerns without it becoming a family conflict. Share responsibilities clearly. Who cooks? Who handles yard work? Who watches the kids on Tuesday nights? Clarity up front prevents resentment later. Here's what I want you to take away from this. If your family is considering moving in together, whether it's your adult child coming back home, your parents moving in with you, or two households combining to make ends meet, that is not failure. That is wisdom. Cultures around the world have known this for centuries. Multiple generations living together, supporting each other, building wealth together. It has always made sense. We just convinced ourselves for a few decades that independence meant living completely separately. The cost of living is forcing us to rethink that. And honestly, for a lot of families, the rethinking is leading somewhere really good. You don't have to choose between financial survival and family connection. Sometimes, the answer to both is the same roof. If this video resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with a family member or friend who might need to hear it. Drop your thoughts or your own experience in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear your story. And subscribe for more real talk about money, family, and making life work in the world we're actually living in. I'll see you in the next one.
They called it lazy. It's actually genius. Every older generation has a word for the younger one, lazy, entitled soft. Right now, that word is aimed at Gen Z. But what if they're not lazy? What if they just did the math and didn't like what they found? Gen Z didn't grow up in a stable world. They were children during the 2008 financial collapse. They watched parents get laid off from jobs they gave everything to. They graduated into a pandemic that shut the entire economy down overnight. They entered the workforce during the highest inflation in 40 years. They did everything right and still couldn't afford to move out. These are not people who don't understand hard work. These are people who watched hard work fail the people they loved most, and they took notes. There used to be a deal. You give the company your loyalty, your nights, your weekends, your health, your best years, and the company takes care of you. Pension, stability, a gold watch at the end. That deal has been dead for 30 years. Companies gutted pensions, replaced full-time workers with contractors, eliminated benefits to hit quarterly targets, laid off thousands. The same week they announced record profits. The deal was broken by the companies, but somehow the workers got the blame for not honoring it anymore. So Gen Z looked at that deal and said, no thank you. Not because they're lazy, because they're rational. They work their hours and they leave. They don't volunteer their soul for a bonus that may never come. They don't skip vacations to prove loyalty to a company that will eliminate their position in the next restructuring without a second thought. Instead, they invest that energy somewhere else, in their own skills, in side businesses, in their health and their relationships and their actual lives. They job hop strategically, and because staying loyal to one company no longer builds wealth, it limits it. They negotiate harder at hiring because they know the first offer is never the real offer. They talk openly about salaries because they figured out that secrecy only benefits the employer. This isn't laziness. This is the most rational response to a system that stopped rewarding loyalty decades ago. Think about what they grew up watching. Dad working 60 hours a week and still getting laid off at 52. Mom skipping doctor appointments because she couldn't afford to miss a shift. Parents who did everything right, saved, stayed loyal, believed in the system, and still ended up house poor, retirement poor, and too tired to enjoy the years they had left. Gen Z saw that movie. They know how it ends, and they are quietly, deliberately refusing to be in the sequel. Every generation adapts to the world they actually live in, not the one their parents described. Gen Z isn't checking out, they're recalibrating. They're asking a question that honestly, more people should have asked a long time ago. If the company would replace me tomorrow without losing sleep, why am I losing sleep for them tonight? That's not laziness, that's self-respect, and it took a whole generation of broken promises to teach it. Follow for more. Share this with someone who still eats lunch at their desk. Efficiency. When a company announces they're focused on efficiency, pop the champagne if you're a shareholder. Start updating your resume if you're an employee, because efficiency has never, not once in the history of American business, meant that workers were going to get more. It means they're going to need fewer of you. Efficiency is a beautiful word. Clean, neutral, mathematical. It sounds like progress. It sounds like a better mousetrap. It doesn't sound like a pink slip, but that's exactly what it is, dressed up in the language of optimization. Every time a CEO stands in front of a camera and says, "We are committed to operational efficiency," somewhere in a conference room, someone is counting heads and figuring out which ones can be replaced by a machine that doesn't need health insurance. This isn't new. This is the whole story. The cotton gin made one worker do the job of 50. 49 people went home. The assembly line made cars faster and cheaper and turned skilled craftsmen into button pushers who were easier to replace. The automated switchboard killed an entire profession overnight. Thousands of telephone operators, mostly women, mostly working class, went from essential to obsolete in the time it took to install a machine. ATMs replaced bank tellers. Self-checkout replaced cashiers. Automated phone systems replaced customer service reps. GPS replaced navigators. Spreadsheets replaced entire accounting departments. Every single time, the press release called it an efficiency. Every single time, someone cleaned out their desk. Now here's the part they always say next. Yes, but new technology creates new jobs. And sometimes that's even true. The automobile killed the horse and buggy industry and created mechanics, road builders, and gas stations. The internet killed the travel agent and created web developers and digital marketers. So yes, some doors open, but here's what they leave out. The new jobs require different skills, in different cities, paying different wages. The 50-year-old textile worker in North Carolina whose mill just installed automated looms was not going to become a software engineer in Austin. That door opened for someone else's kid, not for her. Now we are standing at the biggest efficiency moment in human history. Artificial intelligence doesn't just replace hands, it replaces minds. Paralegals, radiologists, accountants, journalists, coders, truck drivers, 3.5 million of them, watching autonomous vehicles get better every single quarter. Customer service, financial advising, teaching, writing. The white-collar world that survived every previous wave of automation is now directly in the crosshairs. And the companies implementing it are not calling it a layoff. They're calling it the commitment to efficiency. Nobody is against progress. Nobody wants to go back to doing math by hand or sorting mail by zip code. But we have never, as a society, seriously asked the question, when the machine takes the job, where does the person go? We just called it efficient and moved on to the next quarter. The machine doesn't spend money in your town. The machine doesn't coach Little League. The machine doesn't need the diner on Main Street to stay open. But the worker did, and the worker is gone. Follow for more. Share this before the algorithm writes it for us.
A story in surreal style. Swipe now, regret later. There's a box in your closet, maybe a drawer in your kitchen, full of things you bought and barely used. You didn't plan to buy them. You didn't really need them. But it was so easy to say yes. That ease was engineered. Before credit cards, buying something you couldn't afford meant one thing. You waited. You saved. You put it on layaway and picked it up 3 months later when it was paid for. That gap between wanting something and owning it was actually doing something important. It was giving you time to change your mind. Cash is finite. You can feel it leaving your hand. When it's gone, it's gone. And that feeling kept a natural limit on spending that was about to be completely dismantled. The first general-purpose credit card launched in 1958. Bank AmeriCard, later renamed Visa. The pitch was elegance itself. Buy now, pay later. No more waiting, no more saving up. Just hand over a thin piece of plastic and walk out with whatever you wanted. The psychological shift was immediate. Spending stopped feeling like losing something. It felt like a transaction, clean, painless, abstract. And the banks understood something crucial. When spending doesn't hurt, people spend more, a lot more. Then 3 things happened that turned credit cards into the most powerful consumption engine ever built. First, the television shopping channel, QVC, HSN, launched in the 1980s. Suddenly, you could sit in your living room at 2 in the morning watching a host tell you this cubic zirconia bracelet was almost gone. Only 14 left. And all you had to do was call a number and read them your card. No store, no lines, no time to think. Just a phone and a credit card and a countdown clock. Second, the internet. Amazon made it 1 click. 1 click, no wallet, no cash, no friction whatsoever. They stored your card. They remembered your address. They made buying something almost easier than not buying it. And then they added a button that said, buy now with 1 click. And impulse purchasing became an art form. Third, targeted advertising. They learned what you wanted before you did. Browsed hiking boots once? For the next 2 weeks, every website you visit is selling you hiking boots. The credit card was already loaded. The ad just pulled the trigger. Today, the average American household carries over $8,000 in credit card debt, at interest rates between 20 and 30%. That cubic zirconia bracelet from 1987? Still being paid for in a way. We bought things we saw for 30 seconds on television. Things we found at 3 a.m. on a website. Things an algorithm decided we wanted before we even knew we wanted them. And none of it required us to have the money, just the card. The credit card didn't change what we could afford. It changed what we were willing to pretend we could afford. And an entire economy, the warehouses, the shipping containers, the fulfillment centers, was built on top of that pretending. The stuff fills the closets. The debt fills the statements. And the minimum payment is due on the 1st. Follow for more. Share this with someone who just got a new card offer in the mail. The machine that changed money forever. There was a time, not that long ago, when if you needed cash on a Friday night and the bank was closed, you just didn't have it. One small machine changed all of that, and it changed a lot more than just your wallet. In the 1960s, getting cash meant one thing. You went to the bank, during banker's hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 3. You stood in line. You handed a teller your withdrawal slip. They counted out your bills. And if you forgot, if payday landed on a holiday or you worked during bank hours, you borrowed from a neighbor. You asked your boss for an advance. You just went without. Money itself had a closing time. In 1969, a Rockville Center, New York chemical bank installed what most consider America's first true ATM. The pitch was simple. Our bank never closes. At first, people didn't trust it. Putting your card into a machine and trusting it to hand you real money felt like science fiction, but then it worked. And then there was one on every corner. By the 1980s, ATMs were everywhere. Gas stations, grocery stores, airport terminals. Cash was no longer tied to a building with a lock on the door. For the first time in history, money was available anytime, anywhere, to anyone with a card. And here's what that actually did to the economy. Spending went up. Immediately. When cash is inconvenient, people think twice. They wait. They reconsider. When cash is available at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, impulse wins. Bars stayed open later because people could actually pay. Convenience stores boomed. The entire late-night economy, the one we take for granted, was essentially born at an ATM. But it went deeper than that. Small businesses could make payroll faster. Workers in cash-based industries, restaurants, construction, domestic work, got paid more reliably. Tourism exploded because travelers didn't have to carry a week's worth of cash through an airport. But the ATM had a shadow side, too. Bank branches started closing. Tellers lost jobs by the tens of thousands. The neighborhood banker, the one who knew your name and your situation, got replaced by a screen and a 4-digit PIN. And those little fees, $2 here, $3 there, banks quietly built a billion-dollar revenue stream out of the convenience they convinced you that you needed. Oh, and that impulse spending we mentioned? It turbocharged consumer debt. Easy access to cash made it easier to spend beyond your means. And the banks were happy to help with that too. The ATM didn't just change how we get money. It changed our relationship with money. It made spending feel effortless, and effortless spending is always somebody else's business model. Follow for more. Share this with someone who remembers banker's hours. A story in a surreal style. The debt that grows while you sleep. Imagine making payments on a debt for 15 years and then opening your statement one day and owing more than when you started. That's not a nightmare. That's Tuesday for millions of Americans. It starts at 18. You're handed a form you don't understand by adults who say this is just what you do. College is the ticket. Everyone says so. So you sign. $40,000, $60,000, $100,000. You're not old enough to rent a car, but you're old enough to take on debt that will follow you for the rest of your life. Here's where it gets ugly. Federal loan interest starts accruing the day you borrow. If you defer during hard times, the interest doesn't stop. It capitalizes. That means it gets added to your principal. Now you're paying interest on your interest. You make $500 a month in payments for 10 years. You've paid $60,000 and you still owe $62,000. This isn't bad luck. This isn't a glitch. This is how the product was designed. By the time most borrowers hit their mid-30s, the loan isn't just a bill anymore. It's a life sentence written in fine print. They can't buy a house. The debt-to-income ratio kills the mortgage. They can't start a business. There's no capital, no safety net. They can't have kids, or they do, and they're doing it broke. They can't quit the job they hate because the loan payment is due on the first regardless. This is what a financial anchor looks like. It doesn't drown you fast. It just makes sure you never float. And here's what nobody wants to talk about. This isn't just a personal problem. When an entire generation can't buy homes, the housing market seizes up. When they can't start businesses, entrepreneurship craters. When they delay having children, the birth rate drops, the workforce shrinks, and Social Security starts doing the math wrong. Student loan debt in America has crossed $1.7 trillion. That's not money being invested in the economy. That's money being extracted from it. Every month, on autopay. We told a generation that education was the path out of poverty. And then we financialized the path. Added interest, added fees, added penalties for struggling. And then we wondered why they seem so angry. They're not lazy. They're not entitled. They're doing the math, and the math doesn't work. Follow for more. Share this with someone still paying. They spent the house. Your parents' generation was supposed to be the responsible one, greatest savers in history. Then the banks showed them a magic trick. Home values went up in the 80s and 90s. Boomers were sitting on a gold mine, and the banks said, why sit on it? Reverse mortgages, home equity loans, cash-out refinancing. It's your money, you earned it, live a little. So they did. Cruises, Vegas, Branson, Missouri. The grandkids' Disney trip that grandma paid for on a HELOC. The banks knew exactly what they were doing. A savings account earns you 0.01%. A home equity loan charges you 8%. They convinced an entire generation to convert their only real asset into a revenue stream for the bank. And when those boomers pass, there's no house to inherit. There's a lien. The greatest wealth transfer in American history was supposed to go from parents to children. The banks had other plans, and they sold it with a smile and a toll-free number. Follow, share, check on your parents.
There is no escape. You think you're being smart with your money, shopping small, switching banks, cutting subscriptions. It doesn't matter. They get paid either way. Buy a house and the mortgage goes to BlackRock. Rent instead, the building is BlackRock. Shop local, they process the payment through Visa. shop online. That's Amazon's cloud running the website. Switch to a credit union. They still clear through the Fed. Use cash. The store banks at JP Morgan. Buy American. The factory runs on private equity debt. Buy generic. Same three conglomerates make both brands. Eat healthy. The natural label is owned by Kraft. Grow your own. The seeds are patented by Bayer. In the old company towns, workers got paid in scrip. Money you could only spend at the company store. You get paid in dollars. But every road your dollar travels leads back to the same address. It's not a conspiracy. It's just infrastructure. They don't need to chase your dollar. They already own where it's going. Comment, follow, share, start looking at the map. How America turned into a company town. You've heard of company towns, well, where the boss owned your house, your store, your paycheck. America said we'd never let that happen again. But look around. Private equity bought up your apartment buildings. Rents went up 30%. They bought the hospitals. Your ER now has a hedge fund CEO. They bought the nursing homes, the vet clinics, the grocery stores. And the government? They wrote the rules that let it happen. Tax breaks for buyouts, bailouts for the banks, revolving doors between Wall Street and Washington. Your wages go to rent, your rent goes to a fund. The fund is in the Cayman Islands. In the old company town, you got paid in scrip. Fake money you could only spend at the company store. Today it's called a credit card. The interest goes to the same people who own your landlord. They don't need to own your house if they own every house. They don't need to run your government if they fund every politician. America isn't a democracy in decline. It's a company town. And you just found out who the company is. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Follow for more.